Well, it is time to know the law with Attorney Noble McIntyre from McIntyre Law, and we're talking about something that a lot of us think we may know, but now that I read this, I realize I know nothing about it. Fair labor, fair labor. And I want to start with some history.
Okay.
We're going to start with this Fair Labor Standards Act, which I believe was 1938. Is that when it was passed?
1938. A lot of people don't realize it was passed in 1938, and that was the act that really started giving employees some rights. Up until that time, they really didn't. That's the act that made child labor, anybody under 14, not legal to work. Before that time, as you might recall, well, you won't recall, you weren't there, as your grandfather and your grandfather
right, but I think of the little boys in the mine throwing the dynamite in, going, fire in the hole!
That's exactly right, little kids in mines and things like that. This act is what made it illegal to hire kids under the age of 14, with the exception that there were some exceptions carved out for family businesses and agriculture.
Yeah.
And then this is also the act that established, at the time, a 44-hour work week. 2 years later, in 1940, it establishes a 40-hour work week. And established for the first time a minimum wage, which was 25 cents an hour is what it established in 1938. And then 25 years later, the amendment, the Equal Pay Act amendment was added that for the first time made equal pay for men and women, which we still struggle with today.
Yes, we do.
But it was put into the act at that time. So that's a little bit of the history about this act itself.
Now, a lot of people get confused when we talk about overtime because they think, do I deserve overtime? And their bosses say, no, you don't get overtime, your salary. But there are actually there are 3 qualifications that have to be met there.
There are, and there's a lot of litigation going on right now. There's active litigation against Republic and Waste Management and things like that for some of the violations of this act. And there's 3 prongs. One of them is that if you make at least $23,000 a year,
yeah.
But on December 1st of this year, that's actually changing to $47,700.
Really?
A huge increase.
Wow, that'll change a lot of things.
It will. Now that's just prong 1. If you make at least $47,000, if you make under that, starting November 1, you're not exempt. If you are, you may be exempt. That's one prong. The second prong is, are you paid hourly or salaried? A lot of people say, well, I'm receive a salary, so I don't get overtime. My boss can have me stay as long as I want.
But it's not that simple.
That's not, because that's just prong 2 of the test. The third prong is, what are your actual duties? And in reality, most Americans are not exempt. Most Americans should be getting overtime. So it comes down to what are your duties, and one level is executive. If you're an executive, if you're the CEO, and it doesn't matter what your job title is. A CEO, you can call him a janitor, but he's still a CEO. It's what are your actual duties. So if you're an executive, you probably are exempt. If you're not exempt, which would mean you're entitled to overtime. If you're a professional, if you have a professional degree as a lawyer, a doctor, a CPA, a school teacher, you're going to be exempt. But if you don't, you're probably not exempt and you're entitled to overtime. And then the last one is the one where a lot of employers get away with what they're doing, is the administrative aspect. You might say somebody's an administrative assistant. That's not what that means. These are jobs that are reserved for the highest paid people that are actually helping direct the company. So if they have the ability to make a decision that changes the direction of a company, such as a high-level executive, and I know it gets confusing because we already have the executive level up here, then you may be exempt. But by and large, most people are not going to be exempt. And where we're seeing most of this is out in the oil field and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're saying there's so many fair labor issues going on right now, one
Right.
being the oil field.
One being the oil field, the way they pay their day workers, they call them independent contractors. Well, the definition of an employer under the Act is very, very broad. You may be called an independent contractor, you may be paid as an independent contractor, but under the Act, you may very well be an employee. And so when they say to you, hey, we're going to put you on a job site, we're going to give you a place to live out here, we want you to stay there for a week, but we're only going to pay you for 8 hours a day, we have a place for you to sleep the other hours, that's not going to cut it under the Act. Those folks are entitled to overtime. And like I said, active litigation right now against Republic and Waste Management, many, many companies where they're improperly defining their employees. And what you need to understand is, if you are under the Act and you're non-exempt and you're entitled to overtime, it's time and a half for what you're paid. And so there's a lot of money at stake.
Okay, so yes, you're watching right now, and I bet you have questions, because I have so many questions, so I know you do too. So if you need answers and action, who do you call? You call McIntyre Law Firm. They're personal injury experts, but they do everything. Their offices are located at 8601 Southwestern Avenue here in Oklahoma City. Make sure you're being paid correctly. Call them, the number 405-917-5200. You can also find them on the web at McIntyreLaw.com and on Facebook at Oklahoma Law and on Twitter at McIntyre Law.